So it's really important that we make this an interactive and fun session. So I'm going to be looking for questions for you all. I don't want to talk at you. Mohit doesn't want to talk at you. We want this to be a dynamic session where we can help answer some of the questions you have because, as Gilda said, we have been knee deep in this stuff. We know the sharp edges, we know what's great about it, and we're here to talk to you about it. Um, anything I missed, Mohit? Anything you want to say in addition to that?
No, thank you again, Charles, for having me, and Gilda for having me, and all of you for making some time to hear us. Charles, it's 5 a.m. for you, so I'm not gonna feel bad about it because it's 8 a.m. for me. So, thank you again, Charles, for staying up so early for this.
Thank you. All right, so let's get started. So this is Agentforce best practices. Uh, Again, I want to thank you all for being here, up early, up late, wherever you happen to be. I see some folks are here in the 5 a.m. crew. Shout out to you, Josh. Um, I also want to show this forward-looking statement. I don't plan on making any forward-looking statements, but if I do, don't make any purchasing decisions based on them. Only make purchasing decisions based on readily available features. All right, so here's the game plan. We're going to go through Agentforce 201. We're going to get into the nitty gritty of the platform. We're going to talk about the concepts that you need to understand to be able to take away and use these lessons and learnings. I'm going to give you some of my lessons and learnings. You can think of this as best practices. I'm going to share some stuff. Mohit's going to share some stuff. We'll have slides, but some of it will be ad hoc. I have a framework called the Dream Framework that I like for thinking about how to deploy agents. And then we're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A. Now, if that sounds like a plan, please use the little clap emoji or something because we're not in person. Cool. So we're all here to talk about agents, right? And agents are essentially the natural evolution of chatbots and copilots. We started with things that we could talk to that felt conversational, chatbots, but were really driven by fixed rules and capable of doing repetitive tasks. Over the last few years, we got copilots powered by large language models, things like GPT. They're incredibly smart. They can provide tailored assistance, but they are passive because they are generally assistants. And today we live in the age of agentic AI and agents. These are an evolution of copilots because not only are they smart, but they're autonomous, they're intelligent, they're trusted, and most important of all, they're proactive. They'll do the job. It's the difference between getting in your car and using cruise control and hopping in a Waymo and having it take you there. Now, Agentforce, this is the Agentforce cake. I like to call it the Agentforce cake because Agentforce is very much like the icing on the cake. It's built on the foundation of the Salesforce platform, which has been built up over 2 decades at this point, right? And so Agentforce builds on top of the C360, all of the different clouds that we have as a functional layer. Data cloud is your data layer. You have the trust layer, the Einstein trust layer, and then underneath all of that is the Salesforce platform that controls things like your data models, your automations, your permissions, all of the different things that you need to build useful applications. But when you look at this picture, what I want you to take away is that Agentforce is just the thin layer on top of that. Most of what you're doing is core Salesforce. I think someone uh, might have their mic on. Thank you. All right. Now, agents are built of five things, just five things. Role, this is what the agent does. Data, this is the knowledge that they can access. Your CRM records, any data that you might have in Data Cloud, whether it's structured from an external application or unstructured, as in the case of like PDFs, policy documents, transcripts, stuff like that. Actions, the capabilities that they have, guardrails, which is what they shouldn't do, and then finally channels, which is how they work. Now, one thing I like to say about agents that can help you conceptualize how to think about them is imagine you're a hiring manager. Our CEO, Mark Benioff, often talks about digital labor, and it's not just something he says. It's actually a really useful framework to think about agents because they basically are kind of like workers in a sense. You really want to think of them as a role as like a job description. You want to think of data access the same way you would think of data access for a person, right? That you are onboarding into the platform. You want to think of actions in terms of the type of automations that they can actually use, right? And the guardrails of the type of things that you don't want them to do. It's a really good mental framework. So imagine you're hiring a person when you build an agent. Now, the Agentforce architecture is made primarily of three things. There's the agent itself, which has a variety of topics, which are things and problems that it can handle, actions, which are things that it can do, like tools in its tool belt. Now, actions might sound new, but actions are actually things you've already been building the entire time you've been doing Salesforce. They're flows, they're invocable Apex methods, and they're prompt templates, which is a little bit new. So, how does this all come together? Well, prompt templates allow you to essentially create reusable bits of generative AI automation, and you can use a variety of different managed models, GPT models, models from like Anthropic, what have you. And then underneath these prompt templates, they have access to all of the different type of context that you have within your org. So you can bring in data as context to power the prompt templates so that they can do more. Now, when it comes time to actually use the agent, it has a variety of different topics. You're going to have an agent, and those topics are essentially like its responsibilities. And within each topic are going to be tools that it has inside of its tool belt. So you might have a topic. If you have an agent who is like a merchant agent or a shopping agent, one of its topics might be like upsells. And you might have some Apex methods or some flows that help the agent find product recommendations for users as they're shopping, for example. And so you have an agent with a variety of different topics, a variety of different actions, which are themselves powered by a variety of different data sources. So you can see you have a variety of different topics. And as someone interacts with your Einstein agent, the agent will pick between different topics to find the right action to complete the task at hand. And in this way, Agentforce agents are able to essentially handle big fuzzy problems like customer support and customer service, where you don't know exactly what specific flows you need. You just know have a general idea of like what tools they'll need access to in order to solve a problem, and you let them compose the solution themselves. Anything to add here on this one, Mohit?
No, something to call out here is as you can see, Agentforce can do deterministic actions. That means they are 100% testable and predictable. But then prompt templates kind of bring those generative AI capabilities, as Charles mentioned. So sometimes you want to do deterministic actions, right? You want that process to be like 100% running, and your output should be like 100% testable. And that is when you go for Apex and flows because they are deterministic. And then you have indeterministic processes like prompts, for example, which are really good for generative AI tasks. Like, for example, let's say you want to generate a newsletter or an email, you can use generative AI capabilities. I mean, those are the tasks that your flows and Apex cannot do because at that time you're using the large language model capabilities. So you see how agents can do actions with everything that you already do in Salesforce. Plus, now they also get the capability to, do actions that only large language models can do. So they kind of bridge this gap between the capabilities of the large language model and the practical applications that your businesses need. and they can chain together and have multiple of these. That means, don't think of agents as something with only one action or with one flow. They can chain together. So your job is to create these actions and flows, and prompt templates, and we'll get into like how to program them through natural language, which is writing instructions. So once you write these instructions, your agents will be able to chain together this to accomplish a certain goal or job.
That's exactly right. And that's a great segue into, let's see here, the reasoning engine. So as someone's interacting with the agent, essentially what the agent is going to do is chain those actions together to solve the problem. Essentially, it's going to understand what the person's intent actually is, look at the tools that it has available, look at the data it has available, and then the Atlas reasoning engine is going to help it figure out which actions to take to drive the outcomes that the customer is looking for. And so if we hop back into our Agentforce architecture, essentially we have our agent, which is using its reasoning engine to determine which topics are relevant, which actions are necessary to accomplish a given task for a user in the moment. And in this way, you can take the data that you have, the automations that you've built, the prompt templates that you've created to generate solutions that take advantage of automations, deterministic automations like flows and Apex, as well as generative AI powered tools from prompt templates to come up with like solutions on the fly. It's really powerful stuff.
Yeah, and just to add to this, like reasoning engine is something that is really hard to understand, like what it is and how it works, right? Think of this way: large language models. Like if you have a large language model today, I mean, you can go to ChatGPT or any other large language model that you have access to, and if you give a large language model saying, "Hey, I want to solve this problem," and here are some of the actions along with this descriptions. Show me which actions are available to solve this problem. And you will see that the large language model is smart enough to pick based on the natural language descriptions that you have given for the tasks, and it will pick those actions. So large language models by default, right, they are capable of planning and reasoning. This is what is called reasoning, being able to like reason out from that natural language instructions that you give and come up with set of actions, so that is called reasoning. And large language models have that capability, but what they don't have is being able to execute those actions, because you need software to do that specific thing. And in Salesforce, the software is nothing but the flows and the Apex and the prompt templates that you write. So that is very important to understand, is like, what is reasoning, and how these large language models can do planning and reasoning, but they cannot execute actions, and that's why you need software. And that's why we have agents, because agents now bridge the both the large language model and the software.
That's a great, exactly right. And I think that speaks to a question that we just got, Mohit. So, question from Josh. This looks like something similar to chatbots with the model layered on. Is that accurate? Instead of synonym groups, we have the LLM reacting to the user chat. Also, are topics a set of instructions that interpret what the user is saying and point it at the appropriate action to execute? Two questions. We can handle those separately. So the first one was essentially, this looks like chatbots. Um, is it like a chatbot with a model layered on? And to Mohit's point, chatbots, they do both use large language models. Chatbots and large language models both use LLMs. However, uh, chatbots don't have they generally don't really have guardrails. They don't necessarily have topics, and most importantly, they don't have actions or tools. Like they can't do anything. Like the difference between a agent and a chatbot is it's a little blurry, but generally a chatbot is there for assistance. It's like a chat GPT. It'll talk to you. You might ask it to make a picture. It can do some basic things, right? But the goal of it is not for it to act autonomously. The goal of a chatbot is to essentially assist you in doing certain things in a way that like, when you're driving a car, you have cruise control or like lane assist. That's basically what a chatbot is. It does use the same tools, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah. And it depends on what chatbot actually. So, like Copilot version of chatbots, they use large language model, but there's also chatbots prior to large language models, which had like fixed rules. So chatbots have also evolved. Previously the chatbots used to be fixed rules. That means you as a developer has to imagine all the path that the user is going to take and program them, or in other words, you hard code all the logic, right? So you write a lot of if else statement and branching, just to accomplish, and you have to imagine all those scenarios, right? So that is a chatbot basically where you are hard coding all the logic. And LLMs kind of made them really simpler because now that hard coding goes away and you're just sort of describing. But really, thing that Charles made, like one thing that he made it very clear here is, see, if you ask a large language model, draft an email or a chatbot, it will come and draft an email. But if you say send an email, it doesn't have that capability to send that email to you or to your contact, right? uh, Agents are not like that. They have access to the tool that can send the email. In this case, it's Salesforce. So you can not only say, just draft an email, you can say draft an email and send this email to this contact. So it's going to then, not only draft the email, but also have an action plan that, okay, next thing is to send an email. And then if it has tool access, it's just going to pass that email draft to that tool, and the tool is going to send that email. In this case, it's flows, Salesforce flows. So hopefully that clarifies the first question.
Fantastic. Cool. So I did promise, it was promised that we would do some demos. So our next section is going to be, let's see here, lessons and learnings, but we'll just talk, we'll talk about some things and then I'll show you some stuff as well. So the first lesson, that's really important, the key takeaway that I really want you all to take away from this talk about Agentforce best practices is that Agentforce is mostly just Salesforce. And the thing that will allow you to be successful with Agentforce is platform knowledge, because that is the foundation of success. When you're thinking about how an agent works, and I'll show you a little bit this when we get into the demo, is that Agentforce orchestrates solutions with the tool you give it, and the way you give those tools to your agent are through things that you use every day, permission sets and profiles to the agent user. Because as I said before, agents are digital laborers. And in the same way that a human employee that uses Salesforce will have a license, will have a user in the system, so too does an agent user. And in the same way that a real user in Salesforce will have a set of permissions that control what they have visibility and access to, so too does an agent user. And this is actually really important when it comes to debugging, because like that's where most of your issues are going to come from. Same deal with data, right? So agents use data. Um, your normal use cases use data, and like the access to data that they have determines which problems they can solve. Another one is configuration, especially specific configurations for different clouds. So if you've seen if you've seen a good amount of Agentforce demos, right? You'll often see like a demo where it's like Agentforce on Experience Builder. And Agentforce is centered in those demos, right? You're like, oh, it's Agentforce on Experience Builder. But think about what's required to actually make that happen. You need to know Experience Builder. For one, you need to know something about Service Cloud and embedded service deployments. You need to know about permission sets. You need to know about omni-channel routing, right? A good 80% of what you do in order to deploy an agent has nothing to do specifically with Agentforce configuration itself and everything to do with Agentforce, right? But if you have a strong background in the clouds and the core platform, you're 80% of the way there. And then in terms of the rest, it's flows, right? So your Agentforce agents are using flows to get data, to update data, primarily auto-launched flows, as well as invocable Apex. And then the rest of Agentforce, the rest of the things that you're going to be using, the newer things are going to be the different agent types, which include the internal agent, which is called the Agentforce default, the sales coach, the SDR, the merchant agent, the service agent, etc. And then, of course, when you build the agent, there's the agent instructions and topics. But Agentforce is mostly just Salesforce. So let's see here. The next thing is related to something that Mohit brought up earlier, which is that Prompt Builder works really well with Agentforce. I think you said something about how like how Prompt Builder is how you're going to do generative AI within the Salesforce platform.
Yeah, that is correct. So I think prompt builder is very critical tool because it allows you to bring in all the capabilities of the large language model. Now, what are the capabilities, right? I mean, the capabilities are endless, obviously, for large language model. You can really imagine everything that you have done so far to be like almost it can be sort of brought in as natural language instructions to the large language model, and just you can hook up those flows and apex that you have. But really the thing to understand is the capabilities that large language model provides, it will always be stochastic or non-deterministic. Okay, you cannot be 100% sure. So there are tasks that you would definitely want to use prompt builder for, like for example Q&A, right? You have a piece of document and you want your employees or your Salesforce users to be able to do question and answering with that piece of document. Now that's something you cannot achieve through Apex and flows. There's no way to do this. That is where large language model excel, because they can use some advanced techniques like RAG, and we bake in all those techniques into our Agentforce, and in this specific case, prompt builder. So that is where you bring in these prompt builder and templates, right? Other use cases, content generation, like for example, generating marketing assets or generating emails. The other use cases could be sometimes you want the reasoning capabilities of the large language model. Maybe you have some structured data in Salesforce, like 20 rows of, let's say, lead, and you want to, let's say, do some lead scoring on them based on certain rule sets. Now look, this is all something that you can always build through Apex as well. But sometimes you just want to use the natural language and see what large language model is giving. That is the capability maybe your application wants before kind of doing really rule-based lead scoring, right? So that is where you can use the reasoning of the large language model then. You can write a prompt which says, hey, take all these leads from, these flows that are providing a set of leads. Now, look at, fields like, for example, lead source or company, and, other things like lead descriptions, um, other criterias, right? And then say, based on this, qualify or give me top 5 leads. And the large language model will come back with those 5 leads for you, looking at that criteria using its own reasoning or the reasoning that you give as prompt template, right? So really, the way I look at prompt templates in one way is, um, this is how you override, or this is how you provide more reasoning, or right reasoning to the large language model. It's sorts of a bridge between your agent force reasoning and the let's say, the reasoning that about a business process, right?
Yeah. And one of the benefits is, you get to pick which models you want. Like Salesforce provides a variety of different models for Prompt Builder, including top models like GPT 4.0, 4.0 Mini to handle a variety of different use cases, since different models are better for different tasks. Um, and there are a lot of things that you can do with Prompt Builder. I'm currently working on a use case right now where I'm trying to essentially determine whether or not to route to an agent or a human agent or a digital agent, like a service agent, based on whether or not the customer is heated, right? Whether or not they sound really, really angry. And that would be hard to do with a traditional Apex or Flow approach. It'd be basically impossible. But one of the benefits of large language models is that they're just general tools. So you can send a pre-chat text or like a first question to a large language model, see basically determine the sentiment from the model and then use the output to do dynamic routing, right? And 10 years ago, you'd need a data scientist to do that. You need a machine learning engineer. But today you just need prompt builder. So to Mohit's point, prompt builder is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And there's a reason why it's 38% of the AI certification. It's really important. You need it to do generative AI in Salesforce or really anywhere, right? So it's just a really important skill.
Yeah, and I think something important here to understand is, if the world is betting that the large language models are going to keep improving, every year, exponentially, that's what everyone says. If that happens, then imagine how are you going to interact with these large language model in Salesforce application? It will be through prompt builder, right? So you will be able to prompt against those large language models, and then at that point, your business logic, that some logic that you're writing today and the processes that you're writing today through Apex or flows can smoothly move into natural language instructions, simple natural language instructions, in your prompt templates. So it could, you're transitioning that flow logic to the prompt template for a lot of these tasks, because today you have all sorts of automation, using Apex and flows. And in future, right? If I mean, nobody can predict the future, but if in case these large language models become really, really good, they become 90, 95% accurate in doing what you tell them, that how are you going to tell them? Through prompts. And where you're going to do that? Through prompt templates. So you'll pick a model, you'll write these templates, and then expose these templates as actions, just like Apex and flows, to your agents. So your agents will be smart enough to do all those actions.
Yep. And someone asked if you could use DeepSeek with Salesforce, and the answer is yes, right? Like uh, we through Data Cloud, you have access to something called the Einstein Studio, and you can bring in any large language model that you want to, whether it's hosted elsewhere or you're self-hosting it in some way. If it's connected to the internet, the public internet, you can use it with Salesforce. There are some details to it. It expects that the responses from your API matches the spec from OpenAI, but that's pretty much most providers use that spec. As a matter of fact, if you wanted to do set up DeepSeek right now, if you can get to an account because they kind of turned it off due to I think they were dealing with some issues, you'd be able to set it up inside of Salesforce pretty quickly
Yeah.
inside of Einstein Studio, right?
Yes. So yeah, model builder is what we call. Einstein Studio is the tab name. But yes, so basically we have a spec called Open LLM Open Spec. That's Open API 3.0 specification that most of these providers follow. So we make it very easy by, what we do is we give you a low code. So all you're doing is putting the endpoints and the credentials, like the keys, and we automatically sort of convert that into a model that you can access in Prompt Builder. So it's pretty straightforward, actually. In fact, one thing I was seeing yesterday was GitHub now has access to DeepSeek model. So you should be able to just use their endpoint and the token and get it straight up working in Salesforce. It shouldn't take more than 10 minutes now. The benefit, so the question is, like, why do we have this layer in between, right? Like, why do we have this model layer, like this model builder? Of course, we want to bring that large language model into Salesforce, but we want to additionally have the security benefits. Like, if you bring through this, it will go through our trust layer, which basically sits between the API gateway, and our Salesforce, and it'll do all the things that the trust layer does. Like for example, it will not send your information from Salesforce to the large language model. So basically, it will mask a lot of these PII information, which you can control again through the setup here, where you can say mask these fields, mask these things, So it kind of protects you. It makes you to use the Einstein trust layer. So you're getting all that security benefits that Salesforce has built for other models with your own models too now, like in this case, DeepSeek. And also the other benefit that I see is not having to write that authentication layer. Like, today you would have to set up name credentials, right? Apex code or flows to get all those things, right? We want to just simplify all those things. So all you're doing is you'll have a model, you'll get that model, yeah, that one, connect to your own LLM, the last one, yeah. Yep. And then, you get a screen like this where it says name and the URL and the key based. And then you provide the maximum tokens that you want your model to be working with. And then the model gets import. Now, if your specifications are there, it will work. If the specification matches. But sometimes what I've seen is like, for example, if you're using SamNova or Grok with Q. Um, so you will see that sometimes those does not follow that OpenLLM spec that we have. So in those scenarios, you can stand up a MuleSoft instance or Heroku and sort of translate that, like implement that OpenAI spec internally. It is like a gateway, right? It's calling that gateway, and that gateway is calling that API of Grok, and then you simply import that. So that is also something that you can do, and we have a lot of content around this already on developers channels. Developers channel. So if you go to Salesforce developers channel, there's a video that we did on how to bring your own large language model, into Salesforce through this connector, the OpenLLM connector. So you can find them. Let us know. And there is another repo that we maintain. It's called Einstein Platform. I'll just share that repo that has all the recipes for you. Actually, I personally contributed showing how you can use with the Hugging Face model. So like you can bring any of the Hugging Face models that you like through that. So there's a cookbook also that goes along with it. So let me share that repo. So if anyone into the code and wants to write some code and bring that in, it's gonna help. So let's see if I can directly chat here and send this to everyone. One sec.
Awesome.
So
And
here's the GitHub repo, and then there is a cookbook. There's a nice cookbook that you can use. You get a lot of these recipes. It's all open source.
we definitely hop into that if you're a developer, you're interested in doing this type of work. We got two more. I'll go through two more things and then we'll do some demos, okay? Uh, so uh, So the next one is Agentforce mishaps. Agentforce bugs are usually just Salesforce mishaps, and this is again because Agentforce is a thin layer on top of the Salesforce cake. So when things go wrong, the root cause is usually, in my experience, and Mohit, keep me honest here. If you feel differently, let me know. One of two things. It's either data access, where you've misconfigured a profile, a permission set for the agent user. It doesn't have access to an Apex class. It doesn't have access to a field or an object or a record. And when you're going to use it, it fails. And then the second one is configuration. So you're trying to configure something like an omni-channel flow so that your agent can respond to text or will show up inside of a chat, a little chatbot window inside of a website, and it doesn't show up because you didn't set up something inside of Service Cloud correctly. Um, Usually that's what's wrong, less so than like an issue with the agent. Um, Agent Builder itself is fairly intuitive. Everything else around it, with Salesforce, there's a lot of clicks, and with a lot of clicks, there's always an opportunity to miss something. So,
No, I think this is great. So it's also important to understand, Charles, like the different types of agents here, like if you are building and also how they work in terms of the permissioning model, right? So, for example, if you are building an external agent, that means an agent that your customers are going to use, not your employees, through Experience Cloud site or through websites or other means. Um, like other channels we support. I mean, we support like WhatsApp, Facebook, and a lot of channels. So in that case, your agent is running as that single agent user. So when you create these agents for, like, let's say, service agent, the one of the things that we ask you is to pick a user. And pick that user because your agent is going to run as that user. So it's very important that that user has access to these permissions, these flows that you have access to. Also, you have to think through every action and understand what permissions your action should need, and make sure that you give enough permissions for it to execute certain actions here, right? And also, like the misconfigurations can happen because this service agents, for example, is one of the things where you're configuring Service Cloud too, and then you're configuring the agent experience as well. So that's why you need to know like end-to-end setup of service agents. And we have done some sessions on that and some workshops. Again, you can access that all on our YouTube channel. That's a great resource that to always bookmark and follow. So that is important. But then that is external agents. Now you also have internal agents or employee agents, or Agentforce default agents is what we are calling now. These are meant for your Salesforce employees. That means Salesforce actual users, not for your end users. And in this type of scenario, right, the agent runs as your user. So for or the user who is executing it, right? It's not that one single user. The agent runs in the context of the user that is executing the agent. So it is running as that licensed user. So in that situation also, you need to make sure that the users who are able to access these agents have appropriate permission. So you see how how it is designed, right? It's designed based on I would say a different model altogether. Usually in Salesforce, right, when you do any process, right, it just runs either as system user or as the user you're logged in as. Internal agents are exactly designed like that. They run as the logged in user context. But when it comes to like external agents, it might be like hundreds of people accessing that agent. But when 100 people are accessing that on an external site like Experience Cloud site, they run just as that one single agent user. And that's something that you configure per agent that you expose on these channels. So that is important to understand, and understand the how the licensing and everything works around that. Now, these things are going to change. Like I know for Experience Cloud, the product team is working to make sure it runs under the Experience Cloud user context, because Experience Cloud user is technically a Salesforce user. But then you can also have a guest site, right, where somebody can just go and visit that site without having to log in. And that's also a feature that we provide, like publicly accessible sites. In that case, the agent should be able to run as that one single user. So hopefully that kind of clarifies it. I know this is one of those things I wanted to publish an article, but because it's so much changing that we never got to publish the blog. But hopefully, once the product team kind of resolves some of these gaps in the product, we should definitely have some more enablement content around this.
Definitely. And since we're talking about that, we should just hop in. Let's hop into the agents. So as Mohi was saying, there are two different types of agents. Broadly speaking, we have I have an older org, so it's called Einstein Copilot, but these days it's called let's see,
Agent
it's
Force default. It will be called
yes,
Agent Force default, and your orgs will be updated soon. Another 2 weeks here, Charles. Your org will also be updated automatically to call Agent Force default, and then it will be called Agent Force default. There's not going to be anything called Copilot anymore.
good, good, good. So as Mohi was saying, like when you're using the internal Agent Force default, this runs in the context of me and my user. So everything that I have access to, I can see inside of Agent Force, right? Here, Whereas like some of the other agents, I have service agents here, one called James. This one runs in the context of an agent user, which is defined right here. And so that's kind of the difference between the two. Uh, so let's just open up Builder really quickly, kind of talk through Agentforce. We've done a lot of conversation about, how Agentforce works, and we kind of talked about the topics, but I just wanted to show you uh, kind of like Agent Builder and walk through it. So when you first get into it, you have topics. These are logical groupings of actions related to a specific task. So my pretend agent here is called James, and it's mostly there to do resort guest services. Um, it has a topic here called experience management that's aligned to that, where I've kind of defined the topic in written language as well as the scope of this particular task. So that's the topic. And then the second part is the topic's actions. So I have a variety of different actions here that I can take, that my agent can take on my behalf to help solve problems. So I have some that are flows, like get experience details and get customer details. This is to retrieve information around activities and customers. I have one for booking activities. I have one for getting sessions of activities. And I have one that I made yesterday to do um, multi-factor one-time password verification. Um, so that is essentially how you would configure an agent. And this is where you're going to spend the majority of your time configuring a topic and coming out with actions. On the right-hand side, you have your conversation preview. This is where you can ask your agent questions. So you can to kind of test and see if your agent is behaving in the way you want it to. This is really ad hoc. And one thing I'll say is what happens inside of Agent Builder happens in real life. So if you do something here where you update a record, it will be updated. If you create a record, it will be created. So if I were to, and it's accessing real live data inside of my org. So if I were to ask it, tell me about the historical landmarks tour, which is just activity that my agent should have access to. I'll be able to see it retrieve information um, from I'll be able to see it retrieve information from my org. Let me go back here. So you can see it selected my topic. It has a variety of different actions to pick from, and it reasons about which action to do. Now I have a guardrail, a written guardrail, and guardrails are instructions that you write inside of your topic configuration that says I always need to have a membership number that's aligned to a particular contact before I can actually get an answer for anything. So I'm gonna go grab that real quick.
Yeah, and while you do that, I think something that is very important to understand here is um, the instructions. Like there are multiple places where we write instructions, and it is very important to know what goes where. So, topic is where you write classification description, like here, and then there is a scope description. Now, these descriptions are first line of entry. So, if your topic, like if your agent is not picking up the right topics, that simply means you have to tweak your classification description. And then you have action description under action. Okay. So I don't want to steal your demo here.
No,
Uh,
no, let's hop into it. I
yeah. Yeah. So if you look at the action, right? If you look at one of the action here, you see there is action instructions. There's big action instructions that Charles has given to his action. And that is very important because once it is within the topic, it has to know which actions to pick. And the only way it is able to go and do that is based on this agent action instructions. So you write instructions there too. And then the other place you write instructions is that code and so code and member number, right? So these are inputs and outputs. So from that conversation, the large language model can say, okay, this particular input that the user provided pertains to code, or this is the member number. So how is it able to infer that, right? And that it's able to do that through these instructions again. So it's very important. There are three places that we write instructions: topic instructions, action instructions, and the input and the output descriptions, right? So these are the places you write natural language descriptions. And it's very important to understand here something, um, that your topic instructions. So the way you start is, and the best practice is always anything that pertains to actions should go into action instructions. So that is what I recommend. Like have a detailed action instructions, and how the actions are orchestrated, or how you want your actions to be orchestrated, or anything that is related to topic, right, should go to topic instruction, right? Like if you have some act that needs to be done for all the actions, imagine all the actions, or it is a prerequisite to all of the actions. Like in this case, Charles was saying, ask if the customer is not known, you should ask for their membership number, right? Now, this is an action, like this is a thing that applies to all the actions, irrespective of the action that we have in the topic. That's why it has to go to instruction. And the best practice is topic instructions, keep it simple, don't make it complex, and action instructions is where I think you can be really more detailed. I'll tell you why. Because if you add more instructions, if you keep adding more instructions to your, let's say, topics, what happens is at some point your large language model will not understand, because it would have blew the context window. So you know how all of these work. It's like it's based on the reasoning happens due to large language model, and these large language model have something called as context window. Context window means how much of the information it can hold in a single conversation. If that information grows and goes out of the context, then these large language models will not be able to understand, right? So that is why it is very important that you keep your instructions really minimal, the topic instructions. Everything go to actions, because what happens is once it's able to identify an action, then it's a different context altogether, you see? And then it's able, it will have more space to incorporate more things. So that's why what we have seen is less instructions for topic, more detailed instructions for action instructions work really well. And if your instructions are is getting complex, right, and there will be things like, for example, you have a big process and you want to really do through natural language, and your instructions are getting bigger. That's an opportunity for you to understand, I need to either move into a new topic, or I might put all of these instructions into a prompt template and convert those instructions into an action. Because then you're only telling, your instruction is do this action. It's not like do this 10 things, right? These 10 things are now abstracted into a prompt template, right? So now you're just saying your instruction is do this, and then it goes to the prompt template, and then it looks at all the instructions there. So that's the best practice, is to make sure your instruction complexity is not that high, because if it's very high, the large language models are going to have problems.
Yeah. And in addition to all of that, the more text you have, like it's going to try and retrieve some information and focus on some information. The more you have here, the less likely you are to have it pick the right thing. So if you load into the action, it's going to be better. And you saw I had an action that was really long. Uh, Pro tip. You don't have to write your own prompt instructions. Like a lot of times what I will do is I'll go to a large language model, explain that I need instructions for a flow or a function or a Apex invocable method. And I'll either give it the Apex invocable method or even just literally take a screenshot of the flow because at this point, models are multimodal and they can see pictures.
Yeah.
And I'll ask it to do instructions for me. That's actually how I was able to come up with um, my action. I'm gonna hop into my email one-time password action. This text came from a large language model,
Yeah.
and
And that is a great practice also, I would say. Charles, is also one of the things we have seen from other partners as well. What they're doing is writing flowcharts or UPN diagrams for the entire business process, and then giving to the large language model. And the model is smart enough to give the topic instruction and the action instructions if you explain well. Um, this works actually because large language models understand symbols better than text. That is something that is already proven. is they have a good symbolic reasoning with them, than just the text reasoning. So that's also a good practice. Like, if you're working on a process, maybe make a flow chart or write the diagram. Handwritten diagrams might be difficult, but flow charts where you have well-defined boxes, where you can say, I need these actions and these agents, and, I need descriptions for these actions, and provide a screenshot to a large language model, and the model, whatever model your company kind of um, allows you to use. Again, you have to be very careful about the privacy and stuff. Like at Salesforce, we know now we have access to Gemini model from Google. So whatever you have access to, at some point, I think Agentforce will also have a multi-model capability. So at that time, you could use Agentforce to do these things as well. But really, at this point, you'll have to use a large language model, come up with those action descriptions, or the model will come up with these descriptions. And then you put in into the tool, and then you test it out. Other thing I would like to call out is, and we are not covering, which is available already, is the Agentforce Testing Center. So, that is another thing, and we'll publish some video and content on around Agentforce Testing Center. It will be available in the new orgs. So with that, you can bulk test it. That means, you can give bunch of instructions like prompts or utterances of what you are expecting your users to put into that chatbot, and then validate whether they are picking the right topics and the right actions. So that is another thing that's going to make it easier for you to test all of these.
Yes. Oh, I'm excited for that one. And it specifically helps with testing, making sure the reasoning engine does what you want it to do. It doesn't necessarily execute the actions. It just shows um, how it would do it. I'm really looking forward to having that in my org. Um, we got a question from Roshan. Please
Yeah.
explain filter from agent action and show in conversation action. Okay. So, show in conversation. Filter from agent just means that the agent shouldn't be able to see it. So, take my use case for example. This is Apex method that I've made that creates a one-time password for verification. And it takes a one-time password, sends it to an email address, and then a person checks their email and then tells the agent. And that way the agent knows that the person owns the email and probably owns the account, right? I don't want the agent to actually ever know the code because I don't want the agent to ever leak the code to the person. So I would say um, filter from agent action so that they just can't really. It's not in the context of the agent. On the other hand, if I want the agent to use the information and I want the agent to kind of share the information with the user in some way, I would click show in conversation. So my action returns a message to let the agent know whether to know what happened, right? And it also returns a Boolean that says whether or not the email send was successful, right? And based on these two things, the agent can be like, your email was sent successfully, right? Or the email, something failed, try again, right? So that's pretty much the difference between um, those two little check boxes right there. Most of the time, you're going to say show in conversation. Now, another thing in input is require input and collect data from user. Um, you're always going to have at least generally one thing that requires an input, and that's just like, you need this to run the automation. And then collect data from user just means that you want it to come from the user. You don't want the agent to somehow ascertain it on its own. Um, and oh my
Yeah,
God,
while you are there, there is another question here.
yeah.
Like, please explain the input output instructions from Andrea. So, Andrea, those are the input parameters that your Flow or Apex or your prompt templates are expecting, and the output is what you get after the action, right? Output parameters. So you need to write what they are. Like, for example, let's say you have a process, you have a flow that adds two numbers, right? It takes two inputs, and adds them and gives the response, right? So let's say input one, you will write that this is input one from the user, input two, again, this is input two from the user for addition, right? And then the response will be, this is the added value that comes as the response. So you need like one liner explanation of what they are. And that is what large language models will use it to infer, right? So if you prompt today to the large language model, to do something, The model should identify that these are the inputs to a process, right? To the action. And then the model should also be able to infer the output from the action back to the large language model. So you see, these agents are like bridge between large language model, right? And that parsing of these parameters and the values, or the inputs and outputs, is happening by the large language model, and they need to pass back and forth between your tool, which in this case is Salesforce, Flows, and Apex, right? So this becomes very critical actually, and this is one of the difference of building for agents versus other ways. So if you are building Flows or Apex today, you need not worry about writing descriptions or inputs and outputs. You just create them, and it works, right? But in agentic era, that becomes really important. So every inputs that you create in your Flows or Apex needs descriptions, and same with the outputs, and same with the flows too. Like you need to add a clear descriptions. Natural language is how the large language model functions, and that's why for everything that you build in Salesforce, having that natural language description is going to be more important than ever, and that is how the large language models get it and function. So hopefully that explains that.
Awesome. Let's see here. We have a good amount of questions. Can we use our own LLM internally at the company? That's a good question. I mean, you can. If it's exposed to the public internet, I'd be kind of curious, like when you say, can we use our own LLM? Do you mean for prompt builder? Absolutely. If you mean for Agentforce, no. Agentforce, you can't pick the LLM, but with prompt builder, you can.
Yeah, that is another feature that is coming. Like sometimes people are asking for the reasoning. So you have to understand two things right here, like Charles said. When you talk about agent, you have to be particular now. Are you talking about the reasoning, like bringing your own large language model for reasoning, or for the action of the agent? So as Charles said, for the action of the agent, it's possible through the model builder, right? But for the reasoning, we have our own model, right? And we do through that. That is something we don't allow you to configure at this point. Maybe in the future, right? This is definitely a roadmap item where we will let you bring in your own model for reasoning too. Like if you have built a reasoning model which is better in reasoning, or you're adopting a third party model which you think has better cost structure compared to anything that we have, right? Those are the use cases for that, and in the future it will definitely be flexible to allow you that.
Yep. And we got a question. We got another question um, here on when can we start using the Agentforce APIs? So I don't know the specific timeline on that. They are coming. There are videos of our team using it. I would say that like I would also just mention that depending on your use case, there are APIs that you can use to programmatically interact with an Agentforce agent. So I guess one of the demos I wanted to show, and I guess this will be my demo, was a custom client demo. So here's a website that I built that is connected to Agentforce. And so I have this custom Agentforce chat widget that I made. Um, it's running on a React application. So this is all custom code that I built. And I am talking to the exact same agent that you saw inside of Agent Builder. So if I ask it, tell me about the historical landmarks tour. It's going to do the same thing that you saw inside of the agent builder. So if you're trying to build a chat interface, for example, or for a website or an app or through SMS, you can already do that. And that's just through what's called the messaging.
Messaging in-app web
Exactly.
SDK, and yeah, so yeah, this is a very good thing to understand. So this is only, again, this is only for service agents. That is
Yep.
something to remember, is this is for ASA, Agent Force Service Agents. So if you are building Agent Force for your end customers, then you expose to the service channels or service cloud, right? And there we have APIs, as Charles is showing. We have APIs, we call it as messaging for in-app and web SDK APIs. So whether you are building mobile client or React app, like like Charles is showing, right? There is a lot of feasibility there. Like, there are APIs that you can straight up hook like here and you can get started. And this is generally available. Like, this is something that existed forever, I suppose, So definitely, as Charles has shown here, feel free to use that, right? But this is also a good segue into Agentforce APIs or agent APIs, we'll call them, and headless APIs, right? So a lot of times, you don't. So here, right, this is more for a chat experience, right, where you have a chat going on. But sometimes you want to do all of these headless, without like having user interaction too. Like, let's say you have a bunch of leads in Salesforce and you want to run Agentforce actions on them, right? Or Agentforce configuration that you have in Agent Builder, right? And that is where we'll have headless APIs. Of course, they can be used for UI actions too. But that's something that's coming. I think that is coming very soon, in the next release here. Maybe in another 2 weeks, it will be there. And at TDX, we'll be excited to show. I mean, I have a booth to show Agentforce APIs. So, um, yeah, so there are different options, like Charles is saying, right? You already have messaging in app web SDK that you can use today to build these UIs and APIs. But then if you want to go headless, there will be APIs. So, yeah.
Yep. And I dropped the code inside of the chat if you're interested in trying to play around with this and build it yourself. Someone asked, and I think I think we might be slightly over. We should probably wrap up. This has been a lot of fun. I
I
wish we
think we
could
have till 9:30, right?
do we?
Yes,
Okay.
this has been so informational, Charles. I don't want to cut it out. So please continue.
Okay, great. We're gonna keep going. One of the questions that we got was, how do you audit Agentforce data in, Agentforce data and Agentforce sessions? Two ways really. So one thing to know is you'll often hear folks will say, they'll ask, be like, do I need Data Cloud for Agentforce? Why do I need Data Cloud for Agentforce? This is the reason you need Data Cloud for Agentforce. Data Cloud is used to track and audit all of the different sessions and interactions that you have inside of Agentforce and the platform. So as you can see here, I am in Agent Builder. I clicked on the event logs here, and you can see these session IDs. And these are essentially all of the different logs that you can see from my conversation. So here you can see one from embedded messaging. You can see one from the API. If we click on this, we can see some information. Now we can see all of the different events that have occurred inside of the session. We have an event ID, we have event details. Now, one thing you'll notice is that a lot of my events have sensitive data not available. This is this is because of a setting that I set up actually, where I did not decide to enrich event logs with conversation data. If you do that and you start having interactions, you'll be able to see more information. But here's one way that you can see event logs and kind of audit what's happening inside of Agentforce. You can also do some of that inside of Data Cloud. So
Mhm.
outside, yeah, you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, no, data cloud is a very good point, right? So they have to enable trust layer for that. So, to do this, I mean, there will be a setting, like if you, Charles, if you go to your setup screen and,
Mhm.
if you have data cloud here, can you search for Einstein trust layer or
Yeah,
just trust layer, right?
yeah,
Um, yeah, so here, that one. Yeah. So if you click on that, and there you have access to like data masking and other thing, pattern-based masking, and there will be also audit when you go more deeper, um, all the sensitivity level. Maybe you need a feature here called audit, enable audit. So that is also a feature of the trust layer. Basically, you don't have it because it requires certain permission set, I guess.
yeah,
So once you enable that, what happens really is any conversation that you are having with the agent, including the prompts, like the prompt that the agent builder is building internally, because everything gets built as a prompt, right? So that everything gets stored in the data cloud. So if you go to data cloud here, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I don't think you're tracking that metrics in this org.
I have a little bit
Um,
of data, but I don't have the
just
full data.
yeah. So, but here, if you go to the data model here, can you click on the data model tab? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So here you should see something like conversation. So there you go. You see the service agent, copilot, events, and engagement, right? So this is where all the data sits. Um, Also, there are ways to enable like real prompts. Like you can see the prompts not only from the user, but what the agent force tool actually built it out. Um, and that is also something that could be enabled for the org, and you need data cloud licenses for that, of course. So you can really troubleshoot, like, what was it that, agent force, like what was the prompt that agent force built it for the large language model. So you can see all those kind of metrics. It's really interesting. This is only sessions, I think. Here
Yeah.
you are only seeing the sessions, not the prompt. I think it's if you look at, so engage sessions. Okay, so that if you go to all reports, probably there might be other reports too. And there are reports, like you can build like real reports. You see deflection rates and stuff like that. So there are tons of reports you see that comes out of the box here, KPIs and latency, etc. They kind of let you see more things under the hood and monitor your agents. Other thing is we also have something called as Agentforce Supervisor, that is coming again in Spring Release. What it does is you can have a supervisor, like a real human agent assigned, who can have a dashboard access where he can see what's happening with all these agents, like all the conversation in like near real time, and they can basically stop the agent, or kind of understand how the agent is sort of performing. Or sometimes they can like take that request directly from the user, like take that conversation and route to themselves to the real agents. So these things are all coming for service agents. So just want to make it easier, so there is human in the loop collaboration happening when these large language models are not enough.
Nice. All right. Cool. All right. So we have just I guess like 15 more minutes. We'll do some more Q&A, but let's uh try and get through a few more of the slides and answer some more questions. Um, I'm glad we got to the demos, and man, Mogi, I'm glad you came. I didn't know about the agent supervisor. That's amazing. I learned that one just now.
No
Um,
worries at all.
There's a
cool.
lot of stuff you are covering in this session. It's really like mind blowing to see what are all the upcoming features that are coming in.
It
Yeah,
is.
yeah. We are just waiting for the spring release orgs to roll up, and that's why if you get a chance to come to TDX, you should, because you'll see a lot of cool stuff there.
You will see a lot of cool stuff. Um, cool. Okay. Last one. So, and this is something that Mohit brought up earlier, talking about prompt engineering, talking about Apex and flows. Uh, Not every problem needs an agent. So when you're thinking about Agentforce, just to return back to some best practices, make sure that you actually need an agent and it's the right tool for the job. Agents are incredibly powerful, they're incredibly flexible, but they do have some disadvantages. You need to think about guardrails. You need to have a really good focus on secure access control, especially for externally facing agents like the service agent. LLMs are not that fast, so agents are kind of slow. Um, and of course, you have to be comfortable with the agent occasionally being wrong in some cases. They are smart, but they are not all knowing. So, with that in mind, if you can build a solution with a flow, Apex, a trigger, prompt builder, a Lightning web component, something programmatic, something structured, a tool that you already are familiar with that's easy to audit and easy to test, and easy to change, you should do that. You don't have to make the agent do everything. Like if you have a calendar component, you can use the calendar. You don't have to make an agent action for scheduling. It might make sense, but depending on what you have, it might not, right? Just because you can doesn't mean you have to, doesn't mean you should. Um, Use agents for big, fuzzy, unpredictable problems that have a variety of branching paths that you would not be able to predict, like customer support. It's why agents are so much better than chatbots. Before, you needed a branch, you needed a flow for every single possible question and conversation path. But now with agents, you just need to give them guardrails, tools, and data access. Anything to add there, Mohit?
No, I think you pretty much covered. Yeah. So other thing to note is, that chat interface that you see is not the only way to interact with your Salesforce data. Like Charles, you're saying, if you can solution it in other structured way here, they're definitely good. And you can, like, for example, there's models API that Charles, you did a session on, right? That gives you complete freedom. Like, if you are trying to build something, like let's say you have a lightning web component where you want a little bit of that AI capability there, maybe you want to provide like a feature where, you click on a field and the descriptions are automatically populated, or some other generative AI capability into your application. You should feel free to use those models API and lightning web component. So there's not just the one way, chat or agents are not just one way to embrace this AI, right? There's other ways in the platform like flows, triggers, and other things where you can have AI. And then, not again, as Charles said, not everything fits into the AI. Sometimes you want really structured, straightforward processes in place, right? And that's why we have all other tools. So you shouldn't forget about these tools as we are sort of diving deep into this agentic world. And
For
these
sure.
tools are less, these tools are economy friendly also, they're just using regular programming. So again, LLMs and these large language models and agents, they have different special place for it, for sure. I mean, they are like automation on steroids, right? That's how I call them. Like if you need automation on steroids kind of feature, right? That is your go-to tool, agents, right? Because you can bring in that LLM. Now, there are times where, you don't need that, and then you shouldn't be using agents for that because then that will be a wrong solution.
Absolutely. And lastly, I want to just leave you with a framework that I made called Dream. And these are just principles for building and deploying better AI agents. I'm going to go pretty fast, but they'll be in the slides. The first one is just to remember that data excellence is your foundation. So it's really important to make sure that you are building with high quality, harmonized, and relevant data sources. And you can do that with Data Cloud. Now, we don't have time to go into Data Cloud today, but it's definitely worth investigating and investing time into. There's never been a better time to learn Data Cloud than right now.
Yeah,
The
adding
next,
on to the data cloud, right? I feel like that is also a real opportunity for developers here on Salesforce ecosystem for sure. Like, data cloud. I mean, if you look at data cloud, first time when I looked at it, it felt like a click and point tool. But really, I mean, if you dig deeper, right, I'm pretty sure customers will customize it, and this is a great opportunity for Salesforce developers to learn and understand the whole feature set that we provide, and extensibility, like it's completely extensible, and that's why I see there's a lot of opportunity there for developers in terms of building APIs or building automations using data cloud. So
for sure. And then the next is the review of human oversight. So you should establish clear boundaries between what is digital and what is human. Think about the scenarios that AI should not make autonomous decisions. Maybe you don't want an agent to, I don't know, charge a customer's credit card. That maybe that's something that, should be deterministic. Maybe not. Create business rules for when to require human review, and then set thresholds based on impact risks rather than model confidence, right? Think about, is it worth it to have an agent do it based on some of the realities of agents? And given that there's going to be an agent supervisor, use that as part of your human oversight plan as well. um, Set up an ethical framework. So AI agents are new, and we need to think about how we use them and how to use them in ways that are ethical. So define responsible AI principles, like what is the right way to use agents within your organization, and then document those values and the mission and the reason why you're using AI and agents in the first place. Be transparent. Um, there are some demos out there where folks are using AI and not having the AI identify itself. Um, from my particular standpoint, I would say it's always best to be clear when an AI agent is being used in place of a human labor. So I would say clearly identify AI versus human, and then internally document the capabilities and limitations of those agents so you have a good understanding of what they're capable of doing. Protect user privacy. Um, follow data minimization principles, especially for externally facing agents. Be very, very mindful about what data they have access to and what data they can change and update. Salesforce makes this pretty easy. There's a lot of very robust features around permissioning and field and record security. And then accountability. This is new. Like AI agents are new. We need to think about what does it mean for accountability when an autonomous system gets something wrong? Who's in charge, right? Who is in charge of oversight and ownership? So do that. And then, of course, maintain audit trails. Use the data cloud for that. Um, and then when you're building your AI agents, just make sure you have aligned and clear objectives, know what problems you want to solve, what metrics you want to hit, what capabilities are required, and what success looks like. So this is kind of more or less general project product management, um, just applied to AI agents. It's the same stuff. And then finally, have a measurement and improvement plan, right? Track performance metrics and usage patterns. Identify what actions are being used by your agent, what topics are being used by your agents, where do your agents tend to get the worst feedback, like where, if you use an AI agent, you often see the opportunity to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on a particular request. Do those tend to group up to a certain type of action, to a certain type of topic, to a certain type of user? You can build custom reports with SQL or SOQL using Data Cloud to identify improvement areas. And then internally, as an organization, implement feedback loops and continuous enhancements to ensure that you're always building agents that are well suited for the job that you have created them for. And so, dream of a better AI agent. Data excellence is your foundation. Review with human oversight. Make sure you have an ethical framework in place. Make sure that you have aligned and clear objectives. And then finally, make sure you have a measurement and improvement plan. All right, so this would be my Q&A slide. We can do Q&A for the rest of the time, but that's my dream spiel. It's a framework that I
No,
came
that
up
was great actually. That is an amazing slide, that the dream slide. I don't think we give our the implementations are giving much thought about the other aspect that you mentioned here, Charles, like for example, the ethics and the monitoring aspect of it. And also the distinguish or the differentiation between getting work done digitally versus, by actual humans. So love this framework here.
Thank you so much. I think that might be all we have time for. I want to make sure I give JB and Gil the time to do what they need to do.
Oh man, I mean, listen, yesterday I posted on social that you will be sharing things that audiences have not heard before, and you did not disappoint. There were so many nuggets shared today that I was the first time for me, it was the first time for JB, and I'm sure for all the customers and travelers that attended, it was the first time. Thank you so very much for taking time. I know, Charles, you said you were 6 a.m. for you. I'm part of the 8 a.m. crew. I think, Mohit, you're part of the 8 a.m. crew with me. I can't thank both of you enough for taking time out of your schedule to do this series, to take part in this series, and to share all this wealth of information. In addition to that, you also mentioned TDX is a great place where a lot of these new features and functionalities will be announced. But I know you also said, Mohit and Charles, there are documentation that you both are working on that ties back to some of these features. Can you please share where can the attendees get access to these resources? How can they stay in touch with y'all when you start posting some of these content? And because I'm sure that they want to continue to follow you both as you start sharing more and more of these nuggets. Can you please share some of this?
Yeah, so one resource that you should definitely bookmark is our developer channels on that are publicly available. One is I'm just going to post it is developer blogs. Please bookmark them. We spend our entire time here documenting everything that we learn. So follow the developer blogs. And then our YouTube channel, which is Salesforce Developers channel on YouTube. It's one of the places where every Thursday you will see one developer advocate. We do code live sessions where we are exclusively talking about Agentforce these days. And as Charles has everything on the screen, there are self-service Agentforce workshop that we maintain where anybody can, just self-service themselves by just following those exercises and learning more hands-on about these workshops, the one that Charles is showing. And there will be workshops. There are workshops that we organize. If you search for Agentforce tour, you will see there are workshops that our team does in different cities. So that's another way. And then follow us on our social. I just posted my social channel there because anything that I discover, the first thing I do is I go to my social channel and share it out there. Even internally, you should, like, I get all this information from Salesforce release notes and internal channels, and if I'm allowed to publicly talk about that, I definitely write something on my social. So that's definitely a good channel to follow, and also official Salesforce Dev channel, and also release notes that come out again every release. You all must be knowing that if you just search for Salesforce release notes, it will show up in the Google. And then on our blogs we summarize those notes for developers. So definitely follow our blogs. Charles?
Yeah, I would say follow me on LinkedIn. Definitely follow Mohit on LinkedIn. Follow us both, but follow Mohit. He does a really great job of just one. Salesforce is a fire hose. Oh, he does an amazing job of synthesizing what's happening, what matters, and why. So, strong follow recommendation from him. And yeah, just generally, please do subscribe to us on YouTube. I dropped our YouTube channel there. Make sure to subscribe so you get notifications. Hit the bell. But yeah, thank you all for joining. Thanks for having us, Gilda and JB. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank,
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
thank you both. And as I mentioned earlier to all the attendees, all the questions you've been asking, if they didn't get around to it, don't worry. I'm personally taking all the questions, extracting it to a document, and I will be sharing this out with Charles and Mohit so that as they're doing these series, maybe they'll come up with an FAQ. And it's not just for today's session, but all the sessions we have, I'm going to take all the questions, truncate into one master document so that internal teams at Salesforce will be able to create content to help you all in your Agentforce learning journey. So JB, I will hand it over to you to wrap things up.
Wonderful. And this is best of the best sessions, I would say. Thank you, Mohit and Charles, for coming up with this and all the content that you prepared for this one. This is the best one. Thank you. Thanks, Gilda. And thanks everyone for joining us. And I have shared the link to the workshop this Saturday. If you are more interested in doing the demo part, you can attend that session. And the next session will be on 6th. We have the Architecture 101. So join us next session. See you there. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.